Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 23, where we talk about all things dynasty prospecting, but in particular, prospecting in the ABL, a 30-team dynasty league with 20 slots per team for minor leaguers for a glorious 600 prospects. And today is a red letter day for prospecting in the ABL because today is the first day that teams can dump for their major leaguers for this year for prospects in the future. So a lot of teams have been selling. There have been a ton of trades since midnight, which we'll talk about on the show. But before we do that, I wanted to introduce my guest, who's Chris, who's in the Hammering Hank Memorial League with me. I had a guest on earlier this year from that league. But Chris is, eager to be on the show, and I'm happy to have him. So without further ado, I'll bring in Chris. Hey, Chris. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for doing this.
No problem. Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to get started.
Yeah, no, this is great. I try to bring in some folks from outside of the ABL to get different perspectives on, dynasty prospecting. We're all at different stages in our prospecting GM career, so to speak. I thought it'd be fun, among other things, in addition to hearing, what you have to say about your own dynasty experience, to have you help me kind of dissect one of the rosters in the league for trading, to hear your perspective on the prospects that you'd be looking to move as an owner in order to go for it all, or go all in on a league. Because the team we've picked is the ABL Giants, who have the #1 record overall, and they're first in the National League. They have, in fact, made a trade already today, but I'm interested to hear your perspective. And then we'll hear about your crushes and fades. And, for those watching, I'm going to recap and give some observations about the trades towards the end of the show. And so we'll dissect. Maybe there'll be more trades that happen while the show's on the air, and what we can react to them live. But with that kind of a structure for the show, I'm interested to hear first, Chris, just your own dynasty story. How long you've been doing this, how many dynasty leagues you're in now, how's it changed over time, and what have you learned?
So I have been playing dynasty since, I guess, 2018. I've been playing fantasy baseball since high school, which is about 2011, 2010. Mm-hmm. I got into dynasty midway through law school. I just did it with a bunch of my law school friends. The dynasty league I was in, I took over kind of a crappy team, it's just really exciting just to kind of blow it up, start over. I ended up getting into third place by the second year, but then the dynasty league blew up, but which was super unfortunate. I was really annoyed with it. But then we ended up starting a new league with about half of that group, and then a bunch of my other friends from law school in 2020 in the pandemic year, which was weird for a bunch of reasons. We had to make certain rules and decide how we want to count how we want to count the stats, count games, whatever. But the takeaway from it is we had a startup draft in 2020. I started completely from scratch and took a win now team. And, fortunately, unfortunately, I've been stuck in that kind of win now circle, and I've won twice over the last 4 years. Been to the
flags fly forever, brother.
I've been in the finals. I've been in the finals every year. I've choked the last 2, so it's been tough. But I'm trying to figure it out now how to get past the threshold. I have it's a 30 roster limit, 5 NA minors, 10-team league on Yahoo. That's the one I do the most. I've also in the Hammering Hank League with you, but that would be the pride and joy of my law school friends and bragging rights, which is everything. But I have a fairly older kind of mature roster. If I tell you the roster, you're gonna think I'm playing by myself. But basically, I got JT Reamer as catcher, Freddie Freeman at first, Jose Altuve, Mookie Betts, Lindor, pretty stacked.
Your team sucks.
No, my team is really I'm in the league. I did lose Acuna, which was brutal.
That's brutal. Yeah,
it's brutal. And I think he is a really hard dynasty value right now in any league. He's predicated on speed. Yeah. And how do you value that moving forward? It's really tough. And then I've kind of snake bitten. Since I was a win now, I got DeGrom. But then, DeGrom's been hurt. But I've been fortunate. I really work the wire. I try to work the wire and find the next guy, right? So, have heel now. I dropped crochet, which is something that keeps me up at night. But anyway,
it's always the ones that get away that bother you.
It's the ones that get away. Yeah, you have the ones that you make. Like I've had Justin Steele for the last 2 years, right? I essentially got him off waivers. He's been great. A little worse now, but I believe in the talent there, even as a 2-pitch guy.
Sure. And so what about the prospecting angle? I mean, is Hammering Hank the one that's deepest for you in terms of the number of prospects?
Yeah, that would be the number of prospects. That's like what, like a 25 or 22, 23 limit for prospects. So I've kind of deep dive there. My other league's like really 5, so that's a little bit much, but or that's a little bit lower. For Hammering Hank, I think what I've tried to do is build a little bit of a pitching staff with prospects, but mainly focus on bats, because I just get really worried about the value of pitching prospects when they get hurt, right? When they get hurt, it's just something that like they lose value so much, right? Like if you think of like an Andrew Painter, he hasn't pitched.
Yeah, sure.
What's where is his value today? I don't know. That's really hard to answer.
Yeah, I have Painter and Hammering Hank.
Oh no!
I hear you. Yeah, so I've said this before in other podcasts. That with pitching prospects, everybody talks about the risk, the injury risk, because it's real and it definitely affects their value. For me, it's all about the acquisition cost. Like, where did you get the player? So for Painter, I think I used a 3rd round pick on him.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not terrible, right? In terms of an acquisition cost, it's much different than, for example, taking somebody in the 1st round, right? And suffering through multiple Tommy Johns or whatever the case may be. Now you can take a picture in the 1st round. It can turn out great. So far, Skeens looks pretty good. But there is that risk. And so the other thing I like to do is get guys off the wire, who I get for $1 a fab or something. And it's basically a costless transaction, because that's how I mitigate the risks rather than avoidance.
Yeah, so I would say I take a similar approach. I take the approach of the guys who are like who have come up and failed. I really like those guys.
Yeah.
Because then everyone's kind of out on them. The industry's like lower, and it's not statistically relevant in their sample size usually, right? So it's like, hey, someone like Quinn Priester is like for free right now, right? In most types of leagues, maybe not in the 600 where you're thinking about, but like, in most types of leagues. And like maybe he has a future, maybe he doesn't, but I'm going to take a chance, right? Because he's been a top 100 guy before. And especially if I'm in a rebuild, I think that's a great type of target, for example.
I understand. He was, in fact, one of the prospects traded today.
Oh, nice.
So I'll talk about him at the last segment of the show. Talk to me a little bit about how you're relatively new to Dynasty. So talk to me about the learning curve on just getting to know prospects and how you've gone about climbing it.
I think for me, I do a deep dive on their like actual stats. I know everybody's into, exit velocity, the advanced stats, what the expected stats. And I do that too, because I think you have to know your environment. But like, I like to look at like, what are their actual stats at the various levels, right? And like, I try to take the AA stats and the AAA stats a little bit more heavily in like how I look at them. Single A can be such a crapshoot, especially when you're talking about hitters with bad pitching and and then the how do you do H to level and things like that. But usually by the time they're in AA or single or AAA, it kind of washes out. I also do an exercise I think is really interesting, where at every single start of the year, I'll go through like the past 3 to 4 years of like Baseball America or MLB.com's like dynasty or prospects list, the top 100, right? I like to see who's like risen and fallen, and also who is like actually succeeded, right? So if you look at the top, like 20 prospects in any year, like, and you go back and look at them, you'll see like there's like a failure rate of like 1/3, right? or something like that. Anywhere from like
high. It's high.
It's very high, right? And what I mean to say is that like there's a lot of opportunity in that failure from what I've learned, because you can then move prospects for value, right? So like you can move prospects for value, or what we talked about before, the acquisition cost becomes much lower, right? So
Sure.
like a Curtis Mead, a Luis Matos, right? All of those guys, they failed in some type of small sample size.
Yep.
But like, if I'm a rebuilding team, I'd love to acquire them right now.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing those are the kind of things that I've learned. So like, and you think about hammering Hank, right? I believe that I made trades for like where I would take like a Kenta Maheda type, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would move them for, like a Chase Petty or anyone who like needs, who's had some type of injury history, or like who like there's a little bit of a window to acquire them. That's the kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah. So it sounds a lot what you're doing in your approach is just trying to mitigate risk, but also seize good buy low opportunities.
Yeah.
By, in a sense, like trying to look at the prospect's intrinsic value, like what's the upside, what's the potential upside and the potential value versus their market value, which may be depressed for some reason.
Yeah.
And that's certainly like a very viable, approach to prospecting.
Go
ahead.
The other thing I would add is that like that all really depends on where you are on your like team's curve. Like, are you a rebuilding team? Are you in second place? Are you in first place?
Sure.
Are you, and like for Hammer Hank, I think I'm in second place right now, right? So like I didn't expect to be there, but like I will look to move some prospects for viable pieces now, right?
Sure.
And I'm comfortable with that because I get kind of comfortable in the failure rate, right? So, I don't know what X prospect looks like today. What are they going to look like 2 years from now? And usually there's a window in which they have some form of failure, because baseball is really hard, right?
Yeah.
A Hall of Famer, you're like hitting 3 out of 10. So like I will then target that person if I really want them back during the failure time,
Sure.
or be comfortable with the fact that sometimes you have to give to get.
I get it. So what position do you need in Hammering Hank?
I need outfield with the Trout out. And I need another starting pitcher.
Outfield with Trout out. You need a starting pitcher. How do you feel about Bailey Ober?
Oh my God. I want to love Bailey Ober. I really do. I know this is a prospect show, so we're getting all over off that. I want to love him, but he gets blown up so much, and it just like I don't know how to like value him. Obviously, he's pretty good at like 26, 27. Probably has a spot, little risk of getting demoted on that team.
Yeah.
Terrible.
I'll make a trade with you right now on the air.
What are you looking at? You want to look at my team?
We'll do it right now. I'll trade for a prospect right now for you, like because I'm rebuilding.
I saw. I took a peek. I took a peek before you came on. Before I came on.
Let's do it right now, live.
What do you think?
Let me pull up your roster. Let's see here. Of course, my internet is being slow here, so I got too many windows up.
Okay, I got let's see. Who do I have available? You're gonna laugh. I gave this soliloquy about prospects, so I actually have some good ones here.
You do. Like, let's see, guys I like on your roster: Robert Kalaz.
I actually love Robert Kalaz, but I
don't blame him. I don't blame him. He's a good prospect. A lot of power there. Let's see what he got for pitchers. Paralysis is obviously interesting.
Yes, I agree.
I don't know. Let's see here. All right, you can think about this. Like who you want to. You don't have to do it live on the show. I don't want to pressure you, but you can think about it. Like Kalaz interests me. Beavers to a lesser extent, and Paralysis interests me. So you think about that. If you decide you want to,
I'll get back to you when we're off. Yeah, all those. It seems like we might have something working. Okay, but go on with the rest of the segment. I didn't want to get you too off track.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I secretly want to end up doing a deal live on the show. So
Okay.
eventually it's going to happen. Eventually it will happen. So I do have one question for you about something you said, and I'm just interested for your methodology. You do this comparison you said of the top 100 list or whatever, however deep it goes for you, Baseball America, other sources. Is that kind of something you do with any kind of mathematical precision, or is it just the eyeball test? Or how strictly do you track it?
I don't do it like where I put all the names in Excel and like do like some type of formula to that. It's just a part of my learning process because I'd like to see who were people talking about, who were the fantasy analysts like very high on in like 2021, right?
Yeah.
And then who's actually succeeded of that group. And what I found is that like the people who they've been hyping up or like whatever, they don't have like a better success rate, which I would think would be wrong, right? I would think that just generally that, hey, if these fantasy analysts like, Rates and Barrels, like the mainstream guys, even like I've followed Eric Cross a lot, Chris because they give you like they great work with prospect, and they also give you like who the next guy is. That's kind of who I like to chase. But like you would think that they would be right more than not, right? But it just shows that it's kind of like a crapshoot, and I just like to see who's worked out and who hasn't, right? Because because they're not entirely wrong, because it just means that it hasn't worked out at that time frame yet. So there's like if they still have elite skills, or they can potentially work out later. And I just think that like that's something I like to file away in my mind. It's not purely mathematics. It's just kind of like a feel to get the time. If I were doing like a larger sample size, I think I would have to make it to where there's like a formula to where you would see the difference.
Right. I totally get it. That's interesting. So it occurs to me like because we're going to transition to the next segment of the show, which is about the ABL Giants. Given what you've said about where you are in your various leagues, and kind of where your focus is in terms of prospecting, I think you're like perfectly situated to play the role, at least on the show, of the ABL Giants, because the Giants are in a very much a win now mode. Guy who took over the team this year inherited a pretty good prospect list and has done a nice job improving it. But he also inherited a pretty strong roster, and he's augmented that as well. So he's in first place overall in ABL. In a very tough national league. Most of the top teams in the league are over in the NL. And I say that as an AL owner. So I'm very happy I don't have to compete with those guys. But his roster, is on the precipice of like really kind of being able to run away with this possibly. And so the question is in that context, and keeping in mind, of course, that it is a 30-team league. Right. And so you're not going to have the stacked roster that you described in your other kind of home league, we'll call it, right? And we have 600 prospects. So the depth of every organization's prospect list really varies. You're going to have guys like that would never get rostered in most leagues that are rostered in ABL, and even tradable in ABL. So that's in evaluating kind of your options. I know it's a little artificial because you don't see the other rosters, and but that's kind of the context. So with that in mind, I'm very curious, what your thoughts are on who you'd be looking to move off of the Giants roster, and where you'd be looking to fill in. Like you don't have to name names, but the kind of talent you'd be looking for back for these prospects.
So one, just so I understand like league context, a quick question for there. The like were like prospects like Alex Freeland, Kevin McDongle, were they like available before he started this type of league, or did he have them on the roster already?
It varies. So McGonigal was one of the guys who was drafted this year. So like if I remember correctly, let me just pull up his team. One of the great things about Fantrax is you can actually see the history of the players. Which is something that I focus on when trying to acquire prospects, like how much did the owner pay? What was their acquisition cost? Like, and how entrenched?
Because then you get the sunk cost fallacy the other way, and if it's low, then it's like, oh, maybe they're willing to make
exactly. So he drafted, I believe. Let me just look at this transaction history. Yeah, he was drafted. McGonigal was drafted this year in the first round, pick 26.
Okay, I forget how like this is so deep that it's like that's. I mean, that's a great pickup for him. Like I think like he's kind of interesting now, like kind of a fantasy darling. But anyway, so that's good to get some at least background there.
Yeah.
The first guy, one guy I would trade is Chase Hampton. I think he is at the age. He's super affordable on his contract. He's 22. He's really highly thought of as a prospect.
Yep.
I think you get a pretty good haul, at least for like a middle-aged pitcher. I probably wouldn't want someone in my 30s, but you'd probably get someone like 29, 28. And I don't know what his path looks like in the Yankees organization.
Yep.
And I don't know that he's someone who they trade. They're really like, I think almost to their detriment in real life, but I think this does affect fantasy. They hang on to their prospects maybe a little bit too long, right? Like Volpe, I guess that made sense to hang on to. Pereira and Peraza, they could have moved those guys and given them an opportunity. And like some of them now are starting to age out to the point where it's like there's not a fit on the roster, like the MLB roster.
Right.
And you know, what at some point you kind of max out on your prospect value and there's like this optimal curve. And I would be cognizant of that with Chase Hampton because my question is, where do you see the path? Right. So they did lose Schmidt, right? Yep. But they're going to get back Cole, presumably. I mean, obviously anything can happen with that type of injury. If it flares up, he gets shut down, for a very long time. But they have like someone like Cody Petit right now, and even Luke Weaver, who's been lights out in the bullpen. And I just don't see the path of where it's this year or next year, right? Because Heel's going to keep that spot.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have missed this. He's actually out with an elbow injury too right now. So like,
oh, sorry, Weaver,
Hampton.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's that.
Yeah, no, there's a little blip, and it doesn't necessarily show up on his player card that he's out because he's a minor leaguer. But so he's definitely not coming up this year.
So then I certainly would look to move, right? Because what does that look like? And with these minor league guys, if they don't get the innings in the minor leagues, then you also run into the innings cap in the major leagues when they eventually get promoted. And like teams tend to be hyper conservative on that. And it's just unclear, like, so they're going to get shut down. I don't know if that's even like, this is a little bit of a tangent. I don't know if that's even best for the player at this point. Like, because you see,
like, question, I think.
Like, well, it's certainly an open question. I mean, Yuri Perez, he got hurt, right? And he was innings cap limit, and it didn't really matter, right? He just threw hard and got hurt.
So was Walker Buehler.
Yeah.
The list goes on. I mean, it's just, it's not clear to me that there's any rhyme or reason to when the arm blows out. I don't know.
Yes. And okay, so then I think we can go. I'll go through a hitter next. I would actually trade, and this might be a hot take, I would trade Roman Anthony. I don't get the love for him as an elite prospect.
Uh-huh.
I don't get it. I understand, like, the numbers that he puts up, they're good. Certainly the rate stats are good to great. He's off to a little bit of a slower start this year, but the power just isn't enough for me. And the speed isn't enough for me, right? Now, speed, you can have a guy who's like stealing like 35 bags a year in the minor league baseball, and they might steal 10, right? But if he's stealing like 15, that he could steal like 2 or 3, and that's just really not enough if you're not going to hit 35 plus home runs. Right.
So let me ask you this question, because Roman Anthony is an interesting case for exactly the reasons you articulated. Very highly regarded on prospect lists, gets a lot of hype.
Yeah.
His numbers are not great this year. He's off to a slow start. And if I remember correctly, he's repeating the league he's in. And, as a fantasy asset, as you articulated, what's the value? Are we talking about depending on the format you're in, if it's a 285 hitter with 25 home runs and whatever counting stats come with that.
Yeah.
And limited steals, that's not a bad player, but It's not a special player, right? Now in a 30-team league, he has value.
Yeah.
He's probably going to be an everyday regular. If the power comes, then we're talking, that's a different story.
Right.
And there, and we'll see how much he walks, because ABL is a points league, so you get points
Okay.
for walks, right? So it really depends on the format you're in.
Yeah.
So I can see him having value, but he's low right now. So when a would-be trade partner comes to you, right, and they're trading a major league asset that is a win now piece.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think you're going to get for Roman Anthony in exchange?
I think you got to work to find the one owner who's like still excited about him.
Yeah.
Like, because I think there is one. It's not me, but it's someone, right? It's someone who sees, hey, he's 20. Okay, he's off to a slow start. He's very cheap. And the Red Sox, they probably don't win the next 2 or 3 years, so he's probably up next year, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing you have to sell. They don't have if you look at the Major League roster, they got Tyler O'Neill in left. He's in a walk year, probably walks. They have Duran and Willie Abreu, I guess, in right, who they platoon. There's a spot, is what I'm trying to say, for Anthony if he continues to adjust. I would also stress that I think there's like a psychological component in people repeating a league and like struggling the next time.
Yeah.
And I would just say, like, hey, this is not indicative. If I'm the one making the case to like trade him, I'd be like, hey, look, I think what he's shown, how he's viewed is like, as an elite guy. And he's just repeating the levels off to a slow start. It'll turn around. And from where I'm in a win now place, you're in a rebuild team. This is a guy that makes a lot of sense for you. I would look for someone who's a major league viable outfielder right now and be able to take like that. There's an awkward kind of time where you're 29 through 31 and like those types of guys who in these types of communities aren't, I don't think they're properly valued, because I think the way I would think about winning is like 3 to 5 year spans. And like in the 3 to 5 year span, they're going to be really good. And I wouldn't say this as the guy who's like trading Anthony, but I would be like, hey, like there's a chance this guy doesn't work out, right? Or there's a chance he gets hurt or like whatever. Like, and I'm comfortable with like, I'll find the next guy.
Right. It's one of the tough things with a guy like Anthony, and as an aside, I should say that Rourke, the guy who owns the Giants in ABL, is a big Red Sox fan.
Oh, okay. Oh, no. I see. What I was going to say is you should try and find the Red Sox fan that, who's in the league. Or the guy who's named after the Red Sox and like, hopefully he's a fan. And it's like, yeah. The
guy who owns the Red Sox is a Red Sox fan.
So then you probably want it.
Yeah. So it's definitely like, if you look at his roster, Rourke's roster, there are a lot of Red Sox on it. And ironically enough, the owner of the team prior to Rourke was a Red Sox fan. So it's really littered with Red Sox.
Yeah, I saw Blythe on there. I should have known that he was a Red Sox fan.
Yeah. So, I mean, he may have a particular affinity to trading Anthony, but I agree with you that Anthony is a guy who's tradable. I think the challenge is that you're selling low on him right now. So as you said, you're going to look for the guy who's still excited about him.
Yeah.
But I find like if the prospect doesn't sell himself, like you're talking about articulating reasons why the owner should like look past the numbers.
Yeah.
Right. It's hard. Right. There are other guys, like, for example, you mentioned McGonigal, right? Yeah. Who was a top draft pick and is doing well. He's 19. What are your thoughts on a guy like that?
I just don't know what you would get for him. And maybe I'm not the best, like, because I don't play in this deep of a league. Right. I don't know what, like, I would be so, like, I wouldn't be opposed to selling at all, but I just don't know what you would get. I think that would make the difference on whether to buy or sell. And to your conversation back, Anthony, for a second, yeah, I wouldn't sell for like scraps, right? I would only sell if I could get the what I think it would be commensurate value and what his peak looked like. Yep. But I don't know enough about the player. I frankly, like, he's like a very new pop-up guy, kind of in that Alex Freeland mold. I don't know enough about the player to have that type of like level of conversation. But it's certainly someone I would be fine with selling. That wouldn't be like a problem. It would depend on what the price is.
Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, a lot of these pop-up guys, in a league like ABL, in my experience, they do garner traction in trade talks, particularly as like the second player in.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, because people get excited. I didn't think about that. Yeah, if you're doing like a 2-for-1 or like the 2-for-2 with the
Yeah, I mean, like, let's say,
guy prospect.
yeah, like, you say, oh, like they're targeting, one prospect, and you say, well, I want this guy. It's major league. And they're like, I don't know. I say, well, if I throw in this guy, can that get the deal done?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, like, deals get done.
Yeah, no, that actually makes sense, and it's probably a little bit of recency bias.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like this is the guy that's been promoted, that's been talked about on Twitter, and you're like hearing more about him, and it's like, okay, well, I'll get in line. But like, someone like he's pretty far away, like, and he's young, which is fine. But like,
Sure.
what that development curve looks like we don't know yet.
Yeah. Go ahead. You were going to say something else.
Yeah, I was. What about like what you talk about prospect? What about like a Klassen who I'm like fascinated by? I think he's like really interesting.
Right.
And like, what about a prospect for a prospect? Like, would someone like Klassen be like someone who you could trade for like a Ricky Tiedemann?
No.
I don't. Okay, so like, it's not like people wouldn't be low. Like Ricky Tiedemann still holds his value. Is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in a league like this, first of all, pitching is a premium in this league, particularly because of the injury risk. Obviously, Tiedemann's got injuries. Yeah. I think you might be able to pry Tiedemann away from somebody at this point. Because there's a real question of how deep he's going to go into games. Is he durable? Is he really like a closer? And I don't think the Blue Jays have given up on him, and I wouldn't necessarily give up on him as a starting pitcher either. But going back to our conversation about the sunk cost, Tiedemann was like a first-round draft pick.
No, I get it. I get it. I get it. It makes sense. Yeah.
I think you'd have to get like somebody who is promising enough, or like a, part of a package for Tiedemann where you get like, he's the kind of guy to me that you trade for a major leaguer, in a win now move.
Because I think I'm actually full disclosure, I'm not a huge Tiedemann guy anymore, but his proximity is pretty close.
Yeah.
They just lost Manoah.
Yep.
I don't think Ben Francis is the answer there.
I don't think Ben Francis thinks he's the answer.
I feel offensive. I'm sure he's a great guy. Like I don't know. They're close to. They might be close to blowing it up, honestly. Yeah. And like, if they blow it up, they probably trade Gausman and Bassett, right? So that creates a lot of opportunities. Probably close to being on the verge. I can see him getting promoted this year, even if it's like one of those he hasn't really earned it because his numbers kind of stink, to be frank. But
and he's been hurt.
And he's been hurt. Yeah, but there's got to be internal pressure in that organization to like show some type of progress. And I would think he's like pretty close to being on the verge when he's healthy.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. I think in this league it's just pitching, and particularly elite pitching prospects. They have a very enduring value in this league. Where people will still keep coming back to them. So I think you could actually get paid pretty handsomely for Tiedemann right now. And you raise an interesting question because like the doubts you're expressing about him, but still the pros, kind of indicate that this may be like a jumping off point. Like, do you buy or sell? Do you cut bait now, or do you run the risk of holding him and having become nothing? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would look to do, and maybe this wouldn't even be a viable strategy in your league, is I would look to trade like a younger, maybe one or two younger pop-up guys, and like take the risk and see how it goes, right? But like that might not be viable for the Tiedemann owner, which I get on their end too.
Yeah, no, I that's right. So I wanted to switch to my side of the ledger because my role was like who would I be targeting on the Giants?
Okay.
So let's talk about that. And it's interesting. So I did this last episode, with the guest, and we ended up picking the same people, who we were interested in. And it turns out that we're actually like aligned here, which will be interesting. So let's just get this on the stage. So the guy that I picked off of this roster was in fact Chase Hampton.
Pick that you would trade or pick that you wanted? I
would want to acquire off this roster. Okay. All right. And so there are a couple of reasons. So you'll see that number in the middle there on the top line on the right. It's 9.05. That's the scouting grade that I've assigned to him as part of my prospect handbook that I do for this league, which is a combination of a variety of factors, but includes scouting grades from Baseball America and Baseball HQ and all kinds of measurements and demographics about the player. As I note, he's out with an elbow injury, so the scale is 1 to 10. So a 9 point.
You haven't been a 9.0. Okay, so you're very high on him. Okay, good.
Yeah, so very high on him, but he's hurt, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at his 2023 numbers, what I focus on for pitchers is their K minus walk ratios.
That's a leading indicator.
Yeah, so 2023 in A ball, 32.1, super elite. Gets promoted to Double A, 19.0. I usually look at 20% as like kind of the threshold. So 19.0 in Double A ball at age 22, great. I also note on here that he's a Yankee, okay, and that Rourke is a Red Sox fan. So can I get a discount?
No, I love that. You have to understand who is what. Like you have to understand it's people. That's real. Actually, I agree with you.
Yeah. So can I get a discount on him, right? And you'll note in the bottom there, I said I don't want to pay Red Sox tax, right? Consequently, like I don't want to be chasing Roman Anthony or Perales or Blyce or these guys. Like unless I can get fair value for a guy like Anthony because he's low, I might go after him. But I still feel concerned that I'm going to get taxed, right?
That's fair. Yeah.
So I might not chase those guys. I mean, you wouldn't have known that context coming in, but from my perspective, that's something. Now, as it turns out, Chase Hampton was traded today.
Wow. Okay, I'm not so far off. Wow, that's
you're like right on the money. And so the Los Angeles Angels acquired him. Cal got him. And the heart of the trade was Cutter Crawford, a Red Sox pitcher who's 28. And you said like 28-year-old, 29-year-old pitcher, right?
Wow.
Got traded for Chase Hampton. And I actually think it was a really nice win-win trade. I think Rourke and the Giants ended up getting a very good middle of the rotation to like a 3-4 starter, which in this league is significant. To add another starter of that value, Crawford's averaging in the low teens per game in a points league.
What was that? What was Crawford's price?
So he has an expiring contract. Let's look it up. I had Rourke's team up, and I have to go look at the Angels. But it wasn't a crazy. Actually, I'm sorry. He's on Rourke's team now because he just got traded. What is Crawford's price? He was a $6 contract, which is very good.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. So it expires this year, so we can't keep him. It's a pure rental, but he still has a lot of cap room left. I don't want to get too far in the weeds on the impact at the major league level because we have another podcast that handles that stuff. So I'll let Tyler and Cal, who host that podcast, address the impact on this level. But from a prospect perspective, I think Cal was able to jettison a decent starter for a really high-end potential pitcher. And there's risk, and you're going to have to take on some risk for a guy like Cutter Crawford. But I think he did really nicely here in getting, a buy low on Hampton, who has a very high ceiling. And if the Yankees can finish his man, because the big question on Hampton has always been his control. But if they can harness that, this guy has 3 good pitches already. He's working on a 4th. Like, I really like this value. And I think there's a, real upside for Cal here. So, well done. And I think, as I said, I think it was a good move for Rourke as well and the Giants. And I think as we both agree, this is the guy you would have targeted moving. And, he ended up getting exactly kind of what you forecasted. So it's funny how, great minds think similarly. So Rourke's thinking this, you're thinking this, I'm thinking this, and even Cal too is thinking this, the guy who acquired him. So it worked out for everybody. Now having said that, Hampton will never pitch again, and Cutter Crawford will go out for the year for some reason. So,
I know that's always the way it works. Although I actually really like this is a good deal for both. I really like Cutter Crawford. I think he has really interesting stuff, and I think that he provided health, he pitches the rest of the year in their rotation, and he gets takes every 5 days. So I think that's great.
Yeah, it has real value in a league like this to have a.
Do you know like what their prognosis or thought process is on Chase Hampton? Like, elbows are obviously red flags, but I guess they haven't said TJ, I assume, or
When you for Hampton, I haven't read up on where he is in the surgery process, but I know he went out with an elbow. I believe he had the surgery already, but I just don't remember.
Okay. Wow, I can't believe I missed that. I'm usually like very, and I'm a Yankees fan too. I'm like really on top of them.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of Yankees pitchers.
Yeah.
We have a lot of guys in the minors who are high end pitchers. So really good deal for him. So like, look, thank you very much for doing that. It's kind of like a fun exercise. They'll walk you through that. I'm interested, as I do with all the guests that I have on. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about your crushes and fades.
So I think I thought about this as we were talking offline before, but one crush I have is the Tampa Bay's first baseman. What's the name? Xavier.
Oh, Isaac. Yeah.
I think he's like special. Like I really do. Power and speed. He's up to 9 homers, 9 stolen bases. Great. I play in OBP league, so he's a great OBP, but even a pretty good average. He's like valued more top 60, top 50 right now. Part of that is like the bias of first base, not the position, versus like your shortstops, your outfielders get valued more as being more athletic, and 9 times out of 10 that's true. But I think in this sense,
right,
it's not. But I think he could be a top 20, top 15 guy, and that's someone who I would value higher than what the market does.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I love him, and I think he's like has the potential to be the next big thing at first base coming up. So
yeah, and you don't see that type of power speed combo from that position. I think it's that's like a nice little edge.
Yeah, well, and also I mean, look, as you pointed out, he takes walks too, right?
Yeah,
and you can't undervalue that in a lot of the leagues that we play in now. But walks are valued to one degree or another, whether it's on base percentage, OPS, or a points league. It has tremendous value, and it also will keep him in the lineup. Because as they say,
I hope so. I mean, Tampa is so weird with how they
are weird. They are weird.
It's almost like between Tampa and Colorado. I would just they get great prospects. They always mess up on how to actually play them. But I agree. Yes, generally it should 100% keep him in the lineup. He should be a mainstay for them. At some point, I probably next 12 to 18 months, I guess. I mean, he's a little bit further away, but. They have an odd kind of roster where they don't have elite guys anymore. That Franco thing really hurt them on the top end. Just they're not they always were on the precipice of having very, very good teams, but they did it in a way with smoke and mirrors, and now the smoke and mirrors kind of fade a little bit. So I don't know how they approach their promoting prospects, because they're also a cheaper team. So it'll be interesting to do that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, they're very, very good at pitching prospect development, and their hitting prospects have kind of been hit or miss. No pun intended. And they have no more Lowe brothers to kick around anymore. I mean, they got Brandon Lowe still, I guess, but they Nate Lowe and Josh Lowe and all these guys. They have to eventually find some of the family to beat up on. So any other crushes before we get to fades?
There's one. I love Samuel Basallo. And I know he's kind of highly ranked, so it's kind of an easy one, but I just think he has actual top 5 upside in terms of being a prospect. And I think that there can be a path for him to, because he just is so special. One with power, and he just actually chip in a little bit of speed, which I was impressed by. But he takes walks too. He probably doesn't end up as a catcher, probably more first base. That major league team, I assume, has some type of opening there soon. I mean, Mountcastle's pretty good. Santander's play a little bit of first base. O'Hearn, I guess, but I don't think any of them, when Basallo's ready, really keeps him from being able to take over. And they also will have the DH too.
And also, Adley plays some first base as well.
Adley does too, but he's still
know.
he's still the primary.
Oh yeah, no, he'll be catching for them. But like my point is that there's probably a place where they can switch.
Right.
Where,
and which would be great if he's better if he maintains the catcher eligibility.
Sure, as a fantasy asset, absolutely.
Yeah, as a fantasy asset.
Yeah,
I guess the okay. So sorry, you can go. I got.
Oh no, I mean, look, I agree with you. He's a great prospect. And you're entitled to like him even more than consensus. The consensus likes him. What about your fades?
I was gonna say then flipping it. I don't get the hype on Ethan Salas. I just it's the age thing, which is great. That's like a benefit for him, but he hasn't put up power yet, and his slash line is good, but not phenomenal at single A or high.
Yeah.
Right. He's also a repeat guy, so the same kind of logic goes for him and Anthony. Anthony was also gonna be one of my fades, but I feel like we talked a lot about him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that's a fade for me, and the prospect industry has kind of faded on him too. Like if you looked at like last year, he was a top 5 prospect. He's probably still like a top 10 prospect almost by default, but I think it's one of those that like the industry doesn't know why he's a top 10 prospect, but everybody says he is. At least that's my unscientific view.
Right. Well, I'm often critical on the show about prospect lists because they have this like sunk cost issue as well. Like people put them in the top 10, so they're not willing to put them in the bottom 50. Look, in fairness, I'm not out on Salas. I would view this as an opportunity to buy low on him because I think owners like yourself are like, ready to jump ship on him. I think the question is like, when does that market bottom out? Because it's
probably not now.
Yeah,
it might be mid-season. I don't know. Like
right.
It's tough. It's really hard. Like at some point, the people still look for numbers, right? That's still the guy.
Yeah.
Even more than like hype or like whatever people could look like or age, and that's kind of the same thing that happened to Jason Dominguez. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Like, at one point he was like, they thought he was the next Mike Trout. When he was like 17, 16, whenever he was like came to the Yankees, and then he went through a lull for about a year and a half, and now he's kind of back that he's the next Mike Trout. But there was a great buying opportunity, and I actually bought him in a few leagues.
Yeah.
In my Yahoo league, which I was talking to you about earlier, I moved Jason Dominguez and Dylan Cease for Corey Seager and Verlander very recently, which kind of I'm very much in a win now time, and I think Seager, that kind of made sense for me. But like Jason Dominguez is phenomenal. Like I'm a big fan of him.
Yeah, he's just back from injury and he's starting to hit, and maybe he'll be up in the in the late June, July period.
Although we'll see. They kind of have a full outfield.
They're pretty good.
Yeah,
that outfield's pretty good. I think Soto and Judge are like pretty solid out there.
I think one more. Okay, we got to do one more fade. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this guy. What are your thoughts on Colson Montgomery?
Interesting. So I have never been a Colson Montgomery guy. So he's kind of exactly where I thought he'd be coming out of the draft. And I'll tell you why. He was a little old for his draft class.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm always a little skeptical of these guys who are a little old for the draft class because they're physically more mature than the competition. Because age matters more for these younger prospects because they can physically dominate the competition in ways that 17-year-olds can't do yet, particularly in the power department. And I just didn't see the numbers there, and also the numbers that I would expect to correlate to his age, being more mature. Also, the scouting reports on him raised a lot of questions about his approach and his ability to make consistent hard contact. And I just thought he was being overdrafted. He's a guy I would have taken. In fact, I have him in some leagues just by default. I mean, like, somebody offered to me in a package. I was like, sure, I'll take Montgomery. But again, it's all about acquisition cost to me. Like, Montgomery is one of those guys that was going in the first round and usually in like the top 15, and then and now I think you're starting to see kind of the downside, the risk kind of playing out where he's struggling to make contact and the power's there, but it's not great. It's not coming out on the field. And it's not like the White Sox don't have room for him.
Yeah, I guess I think he's got to be up this summer, right? Like, I'm not a Colson Montgomery guy at all, but he is someone who's perennially ranked highly on the list, and like, the lazy man's comp has been Corey Seager, but he looks like Corey Seager. I don't know if he plays like Corey Seager, and I think it's interesting because he's a fade for me, but I have to think he's up in like July. Right.
Yeah. No, I think he's gonna. League context matters, right? I mean,
right.
In a league like ABL, where a guy coming up to the majors and getting regular playing time has value.
Yeah, I know.
And there's a demotion risk if he struggles, like all these prospects. But like, the value in a league like ABL, where you have such deep rosters, is much greater than, for example, in Hammering Hank.
Right.
Where it's a dynasty hold forever and, rotisserie scoring and like, how good is he? I don't know. I mean, what do you project him to be? If you project him to be like a 270 hitter or 260 hitter with 25 home runs, I mean, that's fine.
Yeah. That's not a value in your league though.
No. But in Hammering, in Hammering Hank it's not, but in, ABL.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Because he, healthy, he could play 150.
Yeah,
on a White Sox team.
Yeah, and so bat in the middle of the order and like get RBIs and all those things. So,
they're going to be bad for a very long time. That's tough.
They are going to be bad.
I assume they try, like, they would love to trade Eloy. I think.
Yeah. Well, you want to stay on the field to make that happen.
I know. That's really bad. All right, yeah, that's tough. I don't have any more. Fades. We think we killed the Roman Anthony to death.
No, that's all good. Well, listen, Chris, I'm really glad you're able to come on the show and we were able to work this out. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. It's as I said at the outset, this show is a little unusual for the format because usually I end the show with the guest on it, but this show, because of all the insane trades that have been taking place in ABL for prospecting, I'm going to do a little segment and not burden you by keeping you on the show, so you can go about your Saturday. But again, thank you so much. Let's talk trade and Hammering Hank. You can take a look at the roster and let me know what you want to do.
Absolutely. Have a good one. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be on. And I hope I gave some nuggets of knowledge to everybody.
You did. It was great. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Easy. Bye. All right. ABL, are we ready to talk about these insane trades that have been taking place? I am. There are so many prospect trades happening already. I'm somewhat frankly disappointed that there haven't been more trades while the show was on the air, but hope springs eternal. So I wanted to just talk about a rundown of everything that's happened because it's quite insane. We have 11 trades since midnight last night. We have 21 prospects on the move. Which is about 3.5% of the overall prospects in ABL, which is incredible. We've had 6 picks traded, a lot of fireworks. We got 1 first, 4 seconds, and a third. And there's been a whole slew of prospects. I can't analyze every single deal that's been done, but happy to take comments or questions. I see we got people online watching the show. But I did want to focus on a couple of the individual trades because they were ones that particularly interested me for one reason or another. Probably the biggest trade was done between the Mets and the Royals. Aaron Judge moved teams, which is, probably the top hitter on the market. Again, I'll let Cal and Tyler kind of address the impact at the major league level on their podcast. But what was interesting to me about this trade was the essential compensation coming back was Tyler Black and a late 2026 first round pick, or presumably late, if you think the Mets are going to be a solid team under Matt's management. Matt was our guest last week on the show, of course. Adds a huge bat, Matt does, and trades away players that Matt articulated he likes, guys who make a lot of contact and or have close proximity to the majors. And this trade certainly emphasizes proximity from Brandon's perspective and the Royals' perspective. And I'll get into this a little bit deeper on the next slide. But the interesting thing about this trade is, to me, Chase McDermott, he's a 25-year-old pitcher who's in AAA, walks the park, really struggles, may end up as a relief pitcher, possibly one day a closer. But is he on the Royals roster next year? I don't know. And Kevin Kiermaier is a make weight just to give a roster spot back to Brandon. And you have a delayed first round pick where you don't know where it's going to be in the draft. You'll get a good prospect there. And Brandon's a sharp guy in drafting prospects, so I'm sure he'll get some value there. But is Tyler Black enough compensation, for a guy like Aaron Judge? I'm not sure that it is. You have to really like Tyler Black, and I'll get into that on the next page. But I also want to talk later on about the impact this may have on the market. And by the way, for those scoring at home, Jordan Romano just went on the IL with an elbow injury. So the other trade I wanted to focus on was the Marlins Astros trade. This is Dansby Swanson and Aaron Savale, principally for Lorenzo Montes and 2 second-round picks. And so this is a trade that Evan pulled off, who's been in the sell mode for Houston. And you get some other pieces there too, including Sporat, who's getting some hype in the prospect world this year. But the trade was fundamentally, from my perspective, about Montes and the 2 second-round picks. And Montes is a player that Matt last week pumped up as a crush, and we'll talk about him on the next slide as well. But again, I'll also focus on the potential prospect market impact of these two trades because that's what's fascinating to me. I also touched on the Cutter Crawford trade for Chase Hampton earlier, which I like very much. So again, kudos to Cal. I think you get a really nice player. I think Rourke did well there too. So let's just focus a little bit deeper on the two prospects that came over in these two trades that I mentioned. Montes, I put up there the ABL handbook grade that I gave to him, 8.07, certainly a very high grade, not the 9.05 grade, for example, that Hampton got, but Montes is healthy. He's playing. He's a guy who's repeating A ball. He's 19 years old, so age for level is certainly appropriate. And the interesting thing, if you look at the numbers from 2023 versus 2024, is the significant jump in contact rate, which is something that Matt specifically called out on the last episode. Now, it is not unsurprising to me that there's been a contact rate improvement for a player who's repeating a level. So there is some risk from my perspective that when Montes inevitably gets promoted to AA, or excuse me, high A, I should say, this year, maybe AA by the end of the season. It'll be very interesting to see what happens to his contact rate. There's some risk that it could regress back down to the mid-20s, which is not a terrible number, but certainly not as attractive as 17.6 strikeout rate. I will note that his walk rate has remained constant, and that seems like to be a baseline number for him, the mid-teens, the low teens. Very good number for a power hitter. As I talked about in ABL, being able to draw walks has a lot of value in this league. It also shows a level of plate discipline that you like to see in a power hitter. He'll get on base, he'll score runs. This guy has an elite carrying tool, his power. He's always been scouted that way. It has shown up in games. We're talking about a guy who has very good isolated power numbers. Those are the numbers on the far right. 244 last year, 211 so far this year. 200 is kind of a baseline for a really good power number on isolated power. So he's well above that. Really nice to see. And if he gets to the majors and is productive at the majors, it's going to be his power that carries him there and drives his value. He's a terrible fielder. And the reason I mention that and the reason it's important to think about with prospects is is he going to get playing time and where is he going to play? And the players who are not good fielders run the risk of getting marginalized. It's a greater risk of being marginalized, notwithstanding, tools that are useful. So there's a real DH risk with Montes, and that can still have value, of course, but you might see a more limited, role for him. There's also platoon risk depending on how he matures, as a DH, because everybody's looking for at bats on the major league level, and DH is often a place where you get those things. So definitely like the trade from both sides actually on this trade. Let's just go back to the prior slide before I get over to the Judge trade. To me, this is another example of like a win-win trade for the both owners. The Marlins get two pieces they can use right now. Savale is actually a capable piece. I think his contract price is $22. Swanson's, I think, at 26, if I remember correctly. Having a terrible year. But in the ABL, he's still scoring roughly 2.5 points a game. So he's a serviceable piece in the middle of the infield, gets regular at bats for the Cubs. Could end up getting traded at some point at the major league level. But there's a contract there that the Cubs signed him to, so it may be hard to move. But getting a keepable piece in Savale really makes the sting of giving up Montes and the 2 second-round picks more tolerable. And I will say about the 2 second-round picks, Evan is very shrewd in drafting prospects and also in monetizing draft picks. So I'm sure he'll get value for those 2 picks, either whether he uses them or trades them. So this is actually a really nice haul for Evan in terms of total value from my perspective. But again, I think getting Savalier for the Marlins is a really nice get. So, good for those 2 guys for working out what I think is a really great trade. Let's talk about the Judge trade and Tyler Black. Now, Brandon got a first-round pick too, which again, he'll do something good with, I'm sure. Very shrewd owner, has won the league. I'm in a couple leagues with him or have been, and he knows what he's doing. Tyler Black, let's talk about him. He is repeating AAA this year. He's 23 years old. You can see the prospecting grade that I gave to him in the ABL handbook. He's a very well-regarded hit over power prospect with speed. So 60 grade hit tools, 60 grade speed. And I want to talk about his power as well, which is below 50 in terms of a grade, below average. And he's also, I should just mention, he's come up in the major leagues, obviously, this year. So the clock is ticking on his contract, but he also struggled. So he's been demoted. So a bad cup of coffee at age 23. But still young enough for the age level, the level he's in. That's not a problem. And you can see his numbers last year in AAA, terrific slash line, great, strikeout to walk ratio. That is an elite ratio when you have more walks than strikeouts. And in a league like this, that can have real value. Because this is a guy who's going to make a lot of contact, similar to what Raz does, but he's also going to walk a lot more. And this guy's going to get on base, has tremendous points value per game. He can steal bases. I don't have those listed here, but he has stolen bases at lower levels. Not so many this year so far, but he's been up and down. So maybe hasn't gotten into a groove. But the thing that really stood out when I looked at his numbers are 2 things. One, the isolated power. 204 last year, which is much better than his scouting grade on power. Doesn't have a ton of home runs, but he's getting extra base hits. And really like to see this isolated power numbers, 194 so far this year. His slash line has dipped a little bit, but I'm not too concerned about that because the ratio is holding steady. Particularly that strikeout ratio, you see it's 13.8 this year, 13.3 last year. This is a good professional hitter who can steal bases. I would also note that he's a terrible fielder too. Not as bad as Montes, but he's a poor fielder. And why do I mention that again? This is a guy who is going to struggle perhaps to stay in the middle of the infield on the dirt. He gets marginalized out to the outfield. His profile doesn't have as much value from my perspective because of the lack of power. And is he going to have power at the major league level when he's facing more elite arms? That's a real question to me. So, he's a guy that you've got to be a little careful of in terms of how you're, valuing him going forward at the major league level. And Brendan's in the best position to judge whether the market for Aaron Judge was such that Tyler Black was enough value. I suspected that Judge would have gone for a little bit more, frankly. But I wasn't in the negotiation rooms. I don't know what he was looking at. One might argue you could wait to trade a guy like Judge, maybe get better value for than Tyler Black. But Black is certainly a good piece in this league, and probably is going to project as an everyday regular. Not sure that he's going to be a special player, but we'll see. We'll see. So those are the two trades that really caught my attention. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I view it in the marketplace, and how I think it impacts our prospect evaluation as we go forward. The trades that we've seen so far, from my perspective, have involved a lot of mid to lower tier prospects. Guys like Quinn Priester, who Chris and I talked about earlier in the show, he falls into kind of a guy who is kind of a, considered a bust from where he was evaluated earlier. Some people are still in on him. Some people view him as a buy low opportunity. He was acquired today in a trade for Ahmad Rosario. So Zach was able to unload Priester. Get Priester by unloading Rosario. Zach is a Pirates fan. So it's not lost on me that, Zach may believe in Quinn Priester a lot more than I do, which is fair. But there's a proximity there that you like. Priester is going to have some value if he can get starts in this league. And he could end up being a very serviceable 4-5. But we'll see. The Pirates have, putting aside Skeens, have struggled to develop pitching. And Ronci Contreras is, the most recent example that comes to mind. It takes time sometimes for them to develop pitchers, in my experience. Some of the Pirates fans in the league might not like to hear that, but that's my perspective. And we also saw Jeff unload Hector Rodriguez in the Suzuki trade. At least I believe that was Jeff who unloaded Rodriguez. So Suzuki is and Rosario are both guys who are very serviceable players. Rosario puts up similar numbers to Dansby Swanson, although in less playing time. And Suzuki, has kind of overall been a modest disappointment from when he signed as a major leaguer last year. But he plays when he's not hurt, and, puts up decent numbers. So the reason I mention that is that, the real question to me is, for the buyers out there, are you really getting stuff that's above replacement level? Are there guys who are going to pop up during the course of the year that you can get for $1 that are just as good as better than Hector Rodriguez, for example? Depends how much work you want to do. There may be guys out there like that. I'm also interested that there haven't been more draft picks traded for guys like Rosario and Suzuki so far. Most of the draft picks that we've seen dealt so far, which could be used on prospects, have been kind of throw-ins to deals to sweeten the pot. We saw that in the Judge trade, and we saw that in the Savali-Swanson trade, where you had high-level picks being swapped. So I'd be curious to see how the market shifts from the prospector's perspective, whether they want to start acquiring the picks that so many teams have accumulated. And for example, the Mets have a lot of picks. There are other teams out there that have a lot of picks. Do we see more of those picks get moved in lieu of picking up kind of lower level prospects? That's one question. The next observation I had was that, the top hitter on the market who just had an on fire May in Aaron Judge, went for one very close to the majors prospect who's good, but not elite. And that's Tyler Black that we talked about, and the delayed first. And does that suggest that the people who are out there buying, right, don't have to pay as much, in terms of prospect value, when you're talking about a prospect who's close to the majors, AA, AAA? Because if Aaron Judge went for Black, why should you give up a Tyler Black for the next level down major league hitter? You shouldn't, theoretically. So how is that going to affect the value of the prospects? The value of the major league players people are trying to acquire for prospects. And from somebody who's a seller, a buyer myself, I have to start evaluating like the prospects that I'm offering up, and what kind of expectations should I have coming back. But I think we're all kind of like rebalancing based on these trades. But that Judge trade is going to help set the market for a lot of these prospects. And I have a little typo in my thing, which irritates me at the end of the sentence. But the lower level prospects, do you have to give up somebody who's maybe a little higher ceiling than Tyler Black still? And should the people who are trying to sell major league hitters right now be targeting lower level prospects that have a higher ceiling, because there now is a risk that the prospects they could get at AA or AAA are going to be below the Tyler Black level. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how people calibrate in moving prospects going forward. And finally, I just wanted to touch on the value of pitching in this league and how it always seems to garner better upside than the hitters do in terms of these prospect trades. So the two that stood out, we've already talked about on the show. Cutter Crawford and Savalier got traded, and Hampton and Montes, were the key pieces going back for each of those players. Those are guys with elite upside as prospects, as we've talked about on the show. There are certainly significant warts and risks, as we've also talked about, but neither Crawford or Savalier is an elite piece either. They're good major league pitchers in this league for sure. But you're getting a lot of upside, for guys who are not the top pitchers on the market right now. And so I think you're going to start to see some recalibration of what the expectations should be for the top pitchers that still have not been dealt. And there are a lot of them out there that are going to be dealt. Lastly, my observation is that there are a lot of teams who want to be sellers that are sitting on the sidelines. And it'll be very interesting to see how many bullets are left for the buyers, because we can start to see buyers get put off by a trade like Aaron Judge, in the National League, feeling like there's not really room for them to compete anymore. Will they stop kind of like pushing their top prospects in trade discussions, considering the fact that you also have the Giants in that league? And if Rourke makes a couple more trades, does that have a chilling effect on the marketplace in the National League? The American League is a little bit different because I think it's a little bit more open. And so we might still see American League owners being willing to trade top prospects in order to compete and get to the World Series and try to have a fighting chance against the National League. And so the buyers, start getting an advantage in the National League, but not having to pay as much? And do the buyers in the American League start to have to have conversations with the sellers and seeing how that really plays out? So if you're a seller, maybe you should be focusing on the American League prospectors, because that may be where you have the greatest upside. People are still hungry to make a deal. But those are just my top line observations from the trades that have gone down. I think we're going to see, probably a lot more this weekend. And it'll be very interesting to see, if teams like the Guardians start moving some of their high-priced, major league players that they've been trying to get, out of town. And I think teams like Jake and Tom's team, the Braves and the White Sox, have a lot of talent left to move. And then you got a guy like Sam and the Rangers who have a ton of talent, but Sam always is going back and forth whether he's a buyer or seller. So we'll see where he ends up landing. But there's still another tranche of trades ahead of us that I think are going to be exciting. And there's still a lot of top end prospects that could get dealt. And does somebody start getting desperate and really kind of unload the farm? It'd be interesting to see. But I hope you all enjoyed the show. I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of the trades throughout the day. And it'll be interesting to see, what the biggest trades ends up being and who the biggest prospects are on the move. But as we all sit by bated breath and wait for all this to unfold, I want to thank everybody again for watching the show, and to remember to ABP, always be prospecting.